Lawyers of Reddit, what was your easiest court case? When the other side does not appear to a hearing. In many jurisdictions, this leads to a default judgment, i.e., you lose because you did not defend yourself. Dolly has always been sweet and generous, but everything has simply grown exponentially due to her fame. Examples are the millions of books she gives out for free to children around the globe each month, or how she gave out $10,000 cash to many of my close friends after their houses burned in a fire a couple years back. Thousands of people are employed here and work for one of the businesses she owns, and it's a tad strange to see when you walk in. But the birthing center at the local hospital is funded by and named after her. I honestly can't think of one person I know who doesn't like her. Dolly's heart has only gotten bigger because of fame. I'm on what's called the conflict panel in my county. If for some reason the public defender's office can't represent someone, they call me in to replace them. On Monday, I got called to court for a case. I took one look at the complaint and saw that it was filed outside the statute of limitations. I turned to the judge and said, "You're dismissing this case now." In total, I was in court for 10 minutes, and a small reptile park became the Australia Zoo. In my final year of high school, I got in a zoo for work experience and they let me stay on. Steve was rarely there, and when he was he'd avoid guests, because they would swarm him and he'd get nothing done. But when I did run into him, he was always super nice and still acted like that old friend. Didn't say crike nearly as much as you'd think. That's definitely something Aussies say, but he really played that up for the cameras as his catchphrase. Unfortunately, he died later that year, so right up till the end he was just a lovely person. But my lawyer won a case I had for a defective motorcycle I bought when I was 18 because the other party never showed up. He said those were the easiest, whether it's for child support, parking tickets, or whatever, because, in simple terms, it's pretty much an automatic loss for them. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a juror. It was a fraud case. The prosecution spent half a day presenting evidence. At the end, they announced that they rest, and the defending attorney stands up and says something to the effect of, "The prosecution hasn't provided credible evidence that my client committed the act in question." To which the judge agreed and immediately dismissed the case. We all went home. I suspect that defense attorney considered it one of their easier cases. This is story from a good friend. Friend owns several residential rentals. He had to evict a lady who was fairly behind on get rent. She also damaged the property quite a bit. My friend then brings a lawsuit against her for back rent, damages to the property, and legal fees. She tries to countersue him for emotional distress and tries to represent herself, since she can't afford a lawyer. My friend has a signed rental contract, pile of photos, and nice documents prepared by his lawyer. The lady has a stock form of a countersuit, and a long rambling handwritten letter about emotional distress. But here is the kicker: she filled out the countersuit paperwork backwards. She flip-flopped her name and my friend's under, who was the plaintiff and who was the defendant. Judge tossed all her paperwork in the trash and ruled in favor of my friend. Lawyer said that was the easiest case he had ever won that the other party showed up for. I was a juror in a drunk driving case. They took 2 vials of blood from this wealthy executive. One they tested. The other they kept for the defendant to retest if he wanted to challenge the government's test. The guy's lawyer spent 4 days making every possible argument. It wasn't his blood. The test was wrong. It couldn't possibly be right. Everything except retesting the second vial. They sent us to the jury room with both vials in a clear plastic lock bag. We just looked at the second vial, which the defendant's lawyer didn't bother to test, which would have validated his arguments in 5 seconds, and found him guilty. The city attorney had probably spent about a half hour talking and barely made any closing arguments. He won. Most cases where the police are completely ignorant of charter rights. No criminal case is easier than ones where you can ask police what constitutes a consent search, or what responsibilities Section 10(b) imposes on police, etc. And their testimony shows that they have no idea what rights the accused is supposed to have. Their testimony basically writes the grant analysis for you. It's hard for the court to find that the breach was in good faith when the officers are completely ignorant of 20+ years of charter decisions. A motion for summary judgment and a cross motion for summary judgment, where both motions were easily over 1,000 pages long, including exhibits. The reason why this was the easiest case is because the judge actually read the papers prior to oral argument. So at oral argument the only words out of my mouth were "Good morning, Your Honor" in the beginning and "Thank you, Your Honor" after he grilled my adversary for 20 minutes, granted my motion, and denied my adversary's motion. I'll tell ya. Right now I've had a number of defendants/insurance companies roll over and play dead. I don't quite understand the reasoning, but it has something to do with the pandemic. I filed a suit and the defense lawyer called and said, "Look, my orders are to just get this settled. So throw me a number and we'll get it done." In another one, I filed a demand and the defendant denied it. Shortly after the lockdown started, they sent another letter saying they'll not only pay the demand, they'll throw in $2,500 more than I asked for in my demand. There are plenty of others too. In 20 years I've never seen anything like this. Religion in the workplace, Title VII Civil Rights Law. She sued so many for having S cross in her cubicle. We went with the case all the way to court and found out that she never asked her to even take it down. I take some appointed criminal cases, and I got appointed to a minor drug possession case. The arresting officer neglected to sign the complaint, which made it essentially invalid. When I appeared in court for the case, I just went up to the judge and asked him to dismiss it, which he did. They didn't care enough to fight it. It's not terribly common, but I've managed to settle a few cases before actually filing suit. His first words when he saw my dad 10+ years later was, "The Philly crew is back. Both Will and Jaden are the sweetest people you'll ever meet." He lied that his daughter had been adopted by her stepdad on a court document to avoid paying child support for her when he hadn't for the past 6 years. Funny and unfortunate thing is, he had another daughter that also did not live with him and instead with her mother, as the both had split up but paid child support for her. The first daughter had always had contact with the father and had visited him 2 years prior to the lawsuit. Since there couldn't be much more done about it since he lived on the literal other side of the world, he always had star quality. Everyone from the most important person in the room to a janitor walking through would be drawn to him, and had engaged with everyone in a way that really stuck. She always mentions that he was just a really sincere, deeply felt person. I'm a tax lawyer in Brazil, and more often than you would guess, the government goes to court to collect taxes that were already paid. I just have to go there and present a receipt. Easy peasy. I had an insurance company sue my client for causing an accident. My client was legally parked and not in his car at the time. I called the plaintiff's attorney and asked how she thought she had any theory for recovery. She had mixed up my client with another party and immediately dismissed my client. Not me, but someone I know, and not in the way you'd imagine. He had a client on trial for what is my country's equivalent of a serious assault. He absolutely refused to admit guilt and seek a lesser sentence because of mitigating circumstances, despite his every move being on CCTV. He had destroyed someone with a baseball bat. It was clearly him and he still claimed innocence. Shortest trial ever. He was found guilty, and because he wouldn't admit guilt, he couldn't offer some sort of mitigating circumstance to lower his sentence. So what could have been a few months in prison ended up being, 4 years, possibly 3. I'm not entirely sure. I represented a juvenile sanction for violating curfew. All the paperwork referred to military time. And coincidentally the probation officer was ex-military. They confused 14:30 with 2:30 am. Facepalm. That one. It's hard to answer this question for me. I'm a prosecutor, so 99% of my cases are handed to me and I don't have any control over their quality. If they're decent cases, they usually plead out pretty quickly. I have had some hilariously obvious ones, like a burglary where the guy looks directly into the camera before trying to take it down. He's never actually able to get the camera down. And he's the ex of the person who owns the house, so they recognize him immediately. Or a guy who called the cops to report that his neighbor was stealing his weed. You can probably guess what he got cited for, LOL. Just go about your business. The film The Da Vinci Code. And, as per above spoilers, Tom Hanks was in it. For a day or 3. They all did as they were told. Kept their heads down. Until eventually Tom Hanks came and knocked on their lunchroom door. Basically just said sus for messing up where you work. Can I join you for lunch? And then it was on. Every day. Breakfast and lunch. Where time permitted. Tom Hanks was hanging out with these guys like he was a new employee. Reading the newspaper. Making cups of tea. Getting in the bacon rolls or whatever. Calling people's family members to say hi, it's Tom Hanks, for a laugh just to see this reaction. Basically, after a couple of weeks, was just like one of the team. Everyone on first name terms. Just genuinely nice. Last day he made sure to say bye to everyone. He brought them all some kind of gift, I can't remember what. But it was really low-key. Inexpensive. But personal, which was a nice touch. Just as really wholesome time for everyone. People say Tom Hanks is an absolute lad. And it transpires he is. Verbal agreements were made over numerous phone calls. I know that agreement never happened. I was on the call. In order to refute evidence the agreements were made, multiple witnesses. The employer defendant claimed he was on every single phone call. Made by every employee. Over the course of at least 6 months. Listening in. If he wasn't listening in, he has perfect hearing and could hear both sides of any phone call that was made in the office. He died on that hill. Paralegal here, it's clear none of the stories here are real. Nothing is that easy. The other side always pleads something or there is no case to begin with. Friend of mine was friends with Tom Hanks in high school and went to prom with him. He still writes her personalized birthday cards on one of his typewriters. I went to high school with Emma Chamberlain. She was a huge bully in high school and pretty much a brat who thought she could get away with whatever she wanted, before she got famous. Her parents were divorced, which led to them both always trying to be her friend and never actually parenting her. So they basically let her do whatever she wanted. When she said that people from her high school made fun of her because she was poor and that the parking lot was all BMWs and Range Rovers, I lost my mind because she was the bully in high school. And while the school definitely had some wealthy students, it was mostly a middle-class crowd. My brother knows the guy that Squidward was based off of. Turns out that made him more bitter cause he was made fun of. Chris Hemsworth and his brother Liam. Both really good blokes before and after they became famous. My best friend is cousins with Tyler Posey. She said he was a sweetheart before his Teen Wolf days and he still is now. My brother used to play basketball with a bunch of people in high school. Among those who would sometimes join in was Pete Davidson. My brother said he got ripped on a ton and no one really liked him. But that might just be because he wasn't great at basketball. My aunt had dinner with Keanu Reeves and other people before he did Matrix when he came to Spain. She said that Keanu was very handsome and incredibly polite. A co-worker of mine met Daisy Ridley while on a backpacking trip. Got to know each other pretty well while traveling together. She told my co-worker that she wanted to become an actress. Looks like that panned out pretty well. They said Daisy was an absolutely lovely individual. I knew Robert Pattinson about 15 years ago. Nice guy. Friendly. A lot of fun to be with. He lived by himself in the center of Soho, London. In a tiny one-bed flat that I think he felt like the romantic vision of a starving artist. Or at least wanted to. He had a weird side. He'd say random, violent, depraved things. He was obsessed with Jack Nicholson. He never really gave a duck. He had confidence and he was always himself. And he knew he could be deliberately contradictory and he used that as a personality trope. But he was a good guy. And I get the impression he's very comfortable with himself now that he has developed his career. That he acts very well. And that he can pick and choose his roles based upon what he wants to do and who he wants to work with. Twilight for him was always a means to an end. And I think he worked it very much to his benefit. And didn't compromise himself. My aunt went to high school with Obama and apparently he was called Barry. Otherwise he was basically the same. My sister has a friend that's cousins with a Weeknd. From what my sister told me, he doesn't attend large family gatherings as much. Apparently some relatives only want to ask him questions in regards to his fame and whatnot. I'm not sure if that meant they ask him for favors. But it must get annoying either way. It must suck to be around family and not be your regular old self. At the same time, it must be hard for his relatives to see him as the same guy before he got famous. I'm not saying that they shouldn't try, but people are naturally weird and awkward. It's just another shitty part about being famous. And I'm sure he's not the only celebrity that's gone through this.